pink Chanel suit Jacqueline Kennedy was wearing when her husband was shot 50 years ago this Friday. Here she was, that iconic outfit, to this day has not been washed.
Jackie Kennedy married John F. Kennedy when the world was watching, and together they became one of America's most admired couples. But behind that polished image was a marriage filled with deeply personal struggles. Jackie was expected to smile, stand beside her husband, and protect the family image no matter what happened privately. And some of what she endured was far darker than the public ever saw. The suit nobody will ever see. Most people know that Jackie Kennedy was wearing a pink Chanel suit when her husband was killed in Dallas on November 22, 1963. What most people do not know is what happened to that suit after, and why it remains one of the most aggressively protected objects in American history. Caroline Kennedy transferred the suit to the National Archives under a deed of gift that includes a clause prohibiting public display until 2103. And her descendants have the legal right to extend that restriction even further into the future. The suit was never cleaned. The blood of John F. Kennedy is still on that fabric, and the United States government has agreed to keep it hidden for over a century. Jackie Kennedy spent the rest of her life controlling what the world was allowed to remember about her husband and about their marriage. She locked interview tapes, sued authors she had personally authorized, and negotiated the removal of specific details from books, including what was inside her handbag and the fact that she smoked. The suit was her final act of curation, and she made sure nobody could override it. This was a woman who understood from childhood that photographs and objects tell stories that outlive the people in them, and she was determined to be the only editor. The reason she fought so hard to control the narrative is because the real story of that marriage would have shattered the myth she spent decades constructing. And what makes it even more disturbing is that Jackie did not learn this instinct from politics. She learned it as a child, watching her own family fall apart in front of cameras, and she swore she would never be the one caught off guard again. Her father, Black Jack Bouvier, was a public embarrassment whose affairs were photographed and published. Her parents' divorce in Nevada taught her before she turned 12 that a single photograph could end a marriage. Her mother Janet's calculated remarriage to Hugh Auchincloss, a man chosen for his money rather than his charm, taught her the opposite lesson. By the time she walked into the Washington Times-Herald newsroom as the inquiring camera girl earning $42.50 a week, she already understood that whoever chooses the question controls the answer, and that the caption always outranks the subject. That childhood was the training ground for everything that came later. The deal that kept her from leaving. In August of 1956, Jackie Kennedy was near the end of a pregnancy at Hammersmith Farm in Rhode Island. Her husband was not with her. He was on a chartered yacht somewhere in the Mediterranean, surrounded by friends that included women whose names have never fully been confirmed. Jackie began hemorrhaging. The baby, a daughter who would later be referred to as Arabella, was delivered by emergency cesarean section and did not survive. John Kennedy stayed on the boat. There is an account that has him telling his brother Robert over the phone that what was done and the baby was lost. It was not grief that eventually brought him home. It was a political calculation because advisors warned him that the optics of staying on vacation while his wife buried their child would be devastating to his career. Robert Kennedy handled the hospital arrangements and the burial in an unmarked grave in Rhode Island. Jackie stayed at her mother's house through the fall, and the gossip columns openly printed that the couple was headed for separation. She seriously considered divorce, and this is where the story becomes something that most people have never been told. According to biographical accounts, Joseph Kennedy reportedly responded to divorce threats with money. with figures ranging from $100,000 after a healthy child's birth to much larger sums. While no original document confirms the exact amount, historians acknowledge Jackie's financial dependency throughout her marriage. She buried a baby alone, nearly left, and was financially persuaded to stay inside a marriage that was already destroying her because the Kennedy family needed her face and her composure for a presidential campaign that was still 4 years away. Within months, the house at Hickory Hill, where she had personally painted a nursery for the child she lost, was sold to Robert and Ethel Kennedy. The brother who buried her daughter now owned the room she had decorated for that baby. That nursery tells you everything about how this family operated, and it tells you that Jackie Kennedy's loyalty was purchased, not earned. And even the wedding itself carried signs of what was coming. The man who was supposed to walk her down the aisle at St. Mary's Church in Newport was her father, Black Jack Bouvier. He never made it. He sat drinking alone in a hotel room while the Auchincloss household completed an exclusion that had been quietly arranged for weeks. The designer Anne Lowe, a black woman who had rebuilt the entire bridal party's gowns after a pipe burst, destroyed them 10 days before the ceremony. Absorbed the financial loss of the ruined dresses herself, and was directed to enter through the servants' entrance. The newspapers called the gown the work of a colored dressmaker and left her unnamed. Jackie later said she had never liked the dress, but the photographs from that day were flawless, and that was all that ever mattered in this family. The women he brought into her house. The affairs did not happen in secret hotels or on distant trips. They happened inside the White House, sometimes on a schedule that was coordinated around Jackie's known travel plans. And the most disturbing part is not the affairs themselves, but the specific way they were conducted and who was involved. Pamela Turner had worked in Kennedy's Senate office before the presidency. Multiple sources, including Turner's own former landlady, Florence Cater, placed Kennedy leaving Turner's apartment building in the early morning hours. Cater went so far as to photograph him, claimed she had audio recordings, and spent years trying to get newspapers to publish the evidence. The press largely refused. When the Kennedys reached the White House, Jackie hired Pamela Turner as her own press secretary. Read that again slowly. The woman who had been sleeping with her husband was now sitting at a desk that Jackie could see every single day, managing the public image of the First Lady of the United States. Historians still debate exactly how much Jackie knew and when she knew it, but the hiring itself is confirmed and documented. Whether it was a power move, a punishment, or simply the price of maintaining appearances, that arrangement says something deeply unsettling about what that marriage required of her. Mary Pinchot Meyer was part of their social circle, attended their dinner parties, and her name appears in the White House visitor logs. Judith Campbell Exner's involvement created an entirely different category of problem because she was simultaneously connected to the mob boss Sam Giancana, which turned a personal scandal into a national security threat that J. Edgar Hoover exploited ruthlessly. The phone records were later documented by the Church Committee, and the calls between Kennedy and Exner stopped only after Hoover had a private lunch with the president in March of 1962. Then there was Mimi Alford. She was 19 years old, a White House intern, and by her own account, had never been with a man before Dave Powers brought her to the residence swimming pool and then upstairs to the private quarters while Jackie was away. In her memoir, Alford described encounters that lacked any intimacy or affection. An afternoon where Kennedy asked her to perform a sexual act on Powers while he watched, and the arrangement of an abortion when she feared she had become pregnant. That relationship lasted 18 months. Joan Lundberg, a flight attendant and a single mother, became pregnant by Kennedy in 1958, after Caroline had already been born. According to her unpublished memoir material, Kennedy sent money with instructions that the pregnancy could not continue. Jackie reportedly learned about the relationship and confronted him, but the pregnancy itself was kept entirely hidden from the public. Jackie reportedly made dry jokes in French about the mistresses when guests were present. She had stopped expecting the pattern to change and had shifted entirely into managing how it looked from the outside. The swimming pool and the private bedrooms of the White House operated on a schedule, and Jackie Kennedy's absences from the residence were part of that schedule. The body that was falling apart. The man the country saw jogging on beaches and tossing footballs with his children could not bend down to tie his own shoes without someone helping him. That image of youth and vitality was manufactured every single day through a combination of substances, medical deception, and Jackie's constant management of what the public was allowed to observe. Kennedy's daily medical routine included corticosteroids to manage Addison's disease, which his family publicly denied he had throughout the entire 1960 campaign. On top of the steroids, he received hormone treatments, strong prescription pain medication for chronic back pain, stimulant medications administered by Max Jacobson, sedatives to help him sleep, and additional medications for colitis, urinary infections, and severe allergies. That is not a wellness plan. That is a cocktail that would alarm any physician today. And the mood swings and behavioral shifts it produced were things Jackie had to absorb and adapt to every day while performing the role of a composed and glamorous First Lady. The 1954 spinal surgery had nearly killed him. Infections set in because Addison's disease severely compromised his immune system, and last rites were administered. Jackie cleaned the open wound herself for months at their home in Palm Beach. She organized the research note cards that became the book Profiles in Courage, and she watched as Ted Sorensen wrote substantial portions of the manuscript that would later win the Pulitzer Prize under her husband's name. When Kennedy recovered, the affairs resumed immediately, as though the months of her nursing him back from the edge of death had never happened. Some biographers have drawn a connection between the repeated urinary infections documented in Kennedy's medical history and Jackie's devastating pattern of pregnancy losses, suggesting that an untreated infection, possibly chlamydia, may have been transmitted to her and contributed to the miscarriages, the stillbirth, and the difficulty she had carrying pregnancies to term. It was a consequence of the very behavior she had been paid to tolerate. The country watched her restore the White House on live television and saw 80 million viewers tune in for that Emmy-winning tour. She raised the restoration money through private donors, personally tracked down Madison's original chairs and Lincoln's china, and pushed legislation that made the collection permanent so that no future First Family could sell off the furnishings. What 80 million viewers were actually watching was a woman who once earned $42.50 a week, photographing strangers on the street, demonstrating that she now controlled the most important frame in the country. The cruise she took on Aristotle Onassis's yacht in the autumn of 1963 was noticed by everyone who understood the language of political marriages. It was not a vacation. It was a signal, sent at a moment when the marriage was already being renegotiated in private. And the fact that she chose to be photographed on the deck of a Greek shipping magnate's yacht while her husband dealt with a midterm political landscape tells you that she had already started planning for a life outside the Kennedy machine. 15 weeks of something real. Patrick Bouvier. Kennedy was born 5.5 weeks premature at Otis Air Force Base on the 7th of August, 1963. His lungs had not finished developing. He lived for 39 hours. Kennedy stayed at the hospital the entire time, and Dave Powers later described seeing the president weeping openly, something that had almost never been witnessed by anyone in his circle. After Patrick's death, Kennedy held the small casket before the burial. People close to the couple reported a visible and immediate change in the marriage. There was public hand-holding for the first time in years. There was a physical tenderness and demonstrativeness that had simply never been part of how they interacted before. The people who knew them best believed that something had genuinely broken open in him and that the marriage was becoming real in a way it never had been. 15 weeks separated Patrick's death from Dallas. That is what makes this story so devastating on a level that goes beyond politics or scandal. There is a version of this marriage where those 15 weeks were the beginning of something that could have lasted, where the man who had spent a decade treating his wife as a political accessory and her pain as an inconvenience finally understood what he was losing. And then that version was destroyed in 6 seconds on a motorcade route in Texas, and nobody will ever know whether it would have held. Jackie chose the pink suit for that trip. After the shots, Lady Bird Johnson offered to help her change. Jackie refused. She kept that suit on through the swearing in of Lyndon Johnson aboard Air Force One, through the arrival at Andrews Air Force Base, and through the walk past the cameras at Bethesda Naval Hospital. She said words that have become some of the most quoted in American history. "Let them see what they have done." That suit was not a garment anymore. It was evidence, and she was presenting it to the entire nation. She had spent her whole marriage letting other people decide what the country saw. In that moment, she took the frame back permanently. The myth she built from scratch. 7 days after the assassination, in a house at Hyannisport, Jackie summoned the journalist Theodore H. White and spent 4 hours giving him every word he needed to reshape how the world would remember her husband's presidency. She did not ramble. She did not simply grieve. She edited his notes in her own handwriting. She introduced the word Camelot, borrowed from a Broadway musical about a brief shining moment that ended too soon, and she attached it permanently to a presidency that had lasted barely 1,000 days. The word Camelot does not appear anywhere in the public record during Kennedy's actual lifetime. Jackie invented it as a framework for memory, and Theodore White later admitted the conversation was as much strategy as it was sorrow. Life magazine published the piece on December 6, 1963, and the myth outlasted everything. In 1964, she sat for 7 recorded interviews with the historian Arthur Schlesinger, and then ordered the tapes sealed. They remained locked for nearly 50 years and were only released in 2011 with Caroline Kennedy's personal permission. In 1966, she turned against William Manchester, the author the Kennedy family had specifically chosen to write the authorized account of the assassination. She had given him 10 hours of deeply personal interviews. When Look magazine purchased the serial rights, Jackie demanded cuts, reportedly offered $1 million to kill the serialization entirely, and ultimately filed for a legal injunction against the very book she had helped create. The settlement removed descriptions of the contents of her handbag, references to Kennedy in his underwear, and the detail that she smoked. She lost the battle for public sympathy, but she won the text. And the text is what survived. 4 months after Robert Kennedy was assassinated in June of 1968, Jackie married Aristotle Onassis. She told people she was frightened for her children's safety. She also negotiated the prenuptial contract herself through her own lawyers, and for the first time in her adult life, the money did not flow through a Kennedy family trustee. She was 39 years old and finally financially independent on her own terms. She chose I.M. Pei to design the Kennedy Library, served on the committee that decided which books about her husband would receive the family's approval, and spent the next 19 years working as a book editor at Viking and then Doubleday, spending her days cutting other people's sentences and deciding what deserved to reach print. She never wrote a memoir. Not one word. Not a single page. The woman who controlled every photograph, every interview, every historical text, and every physical artifact from the most scrutinized marriage in American history refused to put her own version on paper. And that silence is the loudest thing she ever said, because it meant that nobody could ever fact-check her against herself. The girl who watched a photograph destroy her parents' marriage when she was a child grew up understanding one brutal truth. The camera outlives the marriage. The suit outlives the body. And whoever controls the archive controls the story. Jackie Kennedy did not just survive that marriage. She outlasted every person who tried to tell it, and she became the only one alive who was allowed to decide what it meant. The suit, the tapes, the sealed interviews, the lawsuits, the silence, all of it was the work of someone who learned as a child that the person holding the camera has more power than the person in the photograph. So drop your thoughts in the comments, because we genuinely want to know which part of Jackie's story changed how you see that marriage.